With us today is Ed Julian, and he's going to talk about Guyasuta and the Custaloga town, which is the recent archaeology exploration they did last summer, and what is, I believe, continuing to this summer.
Yeah.
So, welcome him.
Thank you. Can you all hear me okay? Looks like if I want to use this, I'm going to have to lean in real far. But can you hear me if I yell? Does that work? Okay. Great. Thank you all for having me. Like the gentleman said, my name is Edward Jolie. I'm an assistant professor of anthropology, archaeology at Mercyhurst University in Erie. And I'm pleased to be able to come here and do this in part because it is a great opportunity to engage with members of the public who are interested in the research that we've been engaged in, because it ties into so much local history. Local history that I have to say, as being somewhat of an outsider, is pretty fascinating to me to learn about. And so I say that as a little bit of a segue to a caveat that I'm a little bit new to this, because by and large, while my training is as an archaeologist, I know how to do archaeology. Up until the last year and a half, started work at Custaloga Town. A lot of my field work and work with museum collections has been at sites west of the Mississippi River. So it's a great transition. I'm a firm believer that you need a big picture perspective on human societies, American societies, colonial societies. And so this is a great opportunity for me to sort of broaden my perspective. And I love archaeology. I'm sure a lot of you all do as well. I get excited by research questions and inquiries into the past anywhere. So it's exciting to be here and doing this. This is part of a partnership that we're engaged in, primarily, first and foremost, with the Seneca Nation of Indians based out of Salamanca. We're working with their Tribal Historic Preservation Office, and particularly tribal archaeologist Jay Toth, who unfortunately couldn't make it here to be with us today. And certainly, this is a collaborative relationship in large part because this research project came from the tribe. The tribe asked us to do this, I think, for reasons that I'll talk a little bit more about in a little bit. And of course, I'm joined by colleagues, Ann Marginin, who, with our new historic archaeologist hire, Lisa Marie Walishki, is over there at the big boxes right now, and they've heard me talk before, so they were happy to sort of step aside. Dr. Marianne Nowak, who is our department chair, who's sitting next to Jeff Daly, the ranger at Custaloga Town. Marianne's taking lots of pictures. This is the era of social media. So, and lastly but not least is Frank Vento, who is emeritus professor from Clarion University, who is our geoarchaeologist. He helps us understand the local geology, geomorphology, how landscapes change, to help us understand what it is that we're excavating and understand how the archaeological sites formed as they did. So, with that little bit of background, why are we out there? Why was the Seneca Nation interested in having us do some work at Custaloga Town? And a lot of this has to do with the fact that, as many of you may know, the site figures somewhat prominently in historical records, owing in large part to not only the efforts and actions of the Delaware leader of Custaloga, for whom the village Custaloga Town was named, but in large part because of its similar association with the Guyasuta, the famed Seneca war leader, who in his earlier years helped take General George Washington on a tour of French forts along the Allegheny River. They've mentioned each other in the surviving historical documents, and that sort of association has survived obviously in the historical record and lent itself to the promise of Custaloga Town, which, being just a little bit far south of us here near Carleton, was a site that if you were around in the late 1750s, early 1760s, it was a happening place. Everybody was sort of passing through there as they traveled up and down French Creek. It was so close being as it was to the Venango Path. So that relationship and the surviving legacy of Guyasuta has really been largely, I would say, governed by that relationship with George Washington, rather than focusing more so on the exploits and history of Guyasuta as the individual, as the war leader himself. And so Jay Toth, who is a historian and archaeologist, working for the tribe, being a tribal member, has long been fascinated by Guyasuta. And he was someone who said, as Jay learned more about Guyasuta, he came to realize that Guyasuta was the uncle to the famed Seneca leader's corn planter, but he was also an uncle to corn planter's half-brother Handsome Lake. And given their proximity and relationship by kinship, it's not a stretch to imagine that he could have been, given his own exploits and influence regionally, been influential in their development as leaders. And so starting to learn more about Guyasuta helps us understand more about what came afterwards, right? But also understand sort of the place of Seneca individuals, diplomatic ties and connections at this particularly interesting time in the development of our nation. So our research interest hinges really on helping sort of flesh out some of what we have from the documentary record, confirm some of the things that exist, maybe resolve some debates that exist in the record, but also, to some effect, help protect and preserve it for future generations. Right now, the lands are owned by a combination of landowners. This is a map that you can see on the left showing sort of the broader location in Mercer County. Sort of literally the lands are being split by the border of Mercer and Venango counties, and showing the general project area on the Custaloga Town Scout Ranch, which is really right at the confluence of the North Fork of Deer Creek and French Creek. Gorgeous area, if you've ever been there, but it's also a site for which has survived in historical memory as a place that was long attached to, obviously, Custaloga Town, and for that reason as well, Guyasuta. Now, while there is a monument that exists that was erected in 1915 to Guyasuta at the property, there lingers some questions about the precise location of the accompanying village. There are reports from the early 19th century, around the 1820 or so, when the Hedrick family first moved into the area, that there were still 15 to 20 Indian wigwams still on the property. And it's not unsurprising that these lands, given their location, would have been attractive hunting grounds, routes for travel for a number of different groups, not just Seneca and Delaware peoples, for centuries. And indeed, as we'll see a little bit, there's good evidence that people have been visiting these lands, Native American lands, for thousands of years. And so we shouldn't be surprised by that given the location. What you're looking at on this particular slide is the location of the Hedrick farm in a map that was actually done by C.H. Hedrick, who was himself a well-known surveyor. And what you can make out, I see, are some of the prominent historic features. So a couple of features that get a lot of notoriety are one of the earliest mill races from 1828, or at least I know a lot of people claim to have the earliest mill race, but at least in Venango Mercer County, this appears to be one of the earliest. So I point out here's the head race, the North Fork of Deer Creek, with French Creek there. And then here you can see sort of the marking of Indian graves, which are coincident with the contemporary location today of Guyasuta's burial monument. And then if you move a little bit north, you'll see some lines that indicate and demarcate what appears to have been the Custaloga Town, the actual village site. So from Jay's perspective, one of the reasons he wanted us to go out there was, one, Native American cemeteries are not afforded the protection, legal protections, that other cemeteries and burial sites are. So we're interested in building up evidence that can help us get this registered as an actual sort of bona fide cemetery in that legal sense, but also help document what might remain in terms of the village. We don't really know exactly where it is. Is it where the map says it is? So what kind of accuracy can we find in that map? And then also addressing questions about how best to protect and preserve this and interpret it. What I've been alluding to is that really we think collectively that Guyasuta is one of these sort of underappreciated, neglected individuals, one of these agents in the past who were far more influential in guiding the decisions for some of the people who surrounded them and came after them. So we want to help sort of bring a little bit of new light to that. And as we found, there are a number of sort of controversies that surround Guyasuta, largely boiling down to the location of his burial. This is the 1950 monument that was erected by the Hedrick family. And this plot of land is actually sort of a little postage stamp sized plot of land owned by the Mercer County Historical Society, which is then sort of circumscribed by the property that's owned by the Custaloga Town Boy Scout Ranch. Now, this particular monument was set up on the site that was thought to be Guyasuta's burial and is mentioned in a very prominent 1870s historical account that was left by John Martin, who was actually one of the first settlers in the late 18th century who came to this part of the country. And he moved from Maryland in 1796 and was quite conversant in Seneca and Delaware languages, at least passable enough that he could converse with people openly. And he was an eyewitness to the burial of three individuals, a young woman, a very young boy, and a in his own words, a famed leader of the Seneca, Guyasuta. Okay? And so we have this really detailed historical account talking about all of the things that he observed when they were burying them, talking about what went into the graves with each of these individuals, and more or less indicating that there was some validity to surviving oral tradition, family accounts that talk about where Guyasuta was buried on the Hadrian Farm property. And this is, of course, in contrast to some other accounts that talk about the location of Custaloga's town and also the location of Guyasuta's burial. We sort of don't have time to get into all of that here and now, but I can tell you that, you know, coming into this as sort of an outsider, not, as they say, having a horse in the race, I'm simply going to look at this as objectively as I can and say, what does the evidence suggest about the location of the site? And there really is no evidence to suggest he was buried on the Darlington estate outside of Pittsburgh, none whatsoever. And aside from hearsay, there's nothing to indicate that Guyasuta was interred at somewhere on the corn planter grant. The best evidence I have really from the historical record is aligned by multiple historic accounts, not just Martin's account, but one of Ranger Jeff Daly's ancestors who lived right across from Custaloga town. There are accounts in the 1879 history of Venango County that transcribe their observations about the burial and the events surrounding that burial. And so we have a great sort of connection there that allows us to sort of reevaluate the historical record. So I just put up here one example. This is from Wallace's well-published and really important volume on Native American paths and trails. And it is, you know, quite a fair bit north of where it actually is. And so depending on sort of how you read some of those historical records and the surviving documents, Hutchins' journal has a couple of measurements of distance. Depending on how you read how far you think people could have marched on a given day, 7 or 14 miles, whatever, you can get different estimates. But in this particular case, we've got a good convergence of evidence, we feel, on Custaloga town. And so that's what brought us back to Custaloga town. And of course I should say that these are the conclusion that we just arrived at, but Jay had already done all this research, so he sort of was telling us where to look, and we had to go back and sort of make sure that we were all on the same page. So initially what our interest was in our first field season in 2016 was do some ground truthing of the historical maps, see what we could find on the surface, map historical features. One, bearing in mind that one of our interests was hopefully trying to protect and preserve the cemetery, the burial itself, and the monument. Find out are there actually other burials there, as some of the historical documents indicate. But also sort of fit it in a broader regional archaeological context. There were some records from the appears to be the mid-'80s that suggest there are other archaeological materials at the site. But, you know, given that these aren't actively plowed fields anymore, it's hard to see a lot visible from the surface. So we want to identify features from the surface, surviving foundations, old pieces of equipment, things that might tell us how people were using the landscape that would complement the documentary record. And so what you see here is obviously a view of the contemporary Hadrian house. And then on the right, some of the surviving surface features, modifications of that 1928 mill race. And so this was great because, one, it allowed us to sort of get those anchor points on the maps that we could then key into what we're finding on the ground and compare with and against the Hadrian map of the property. The big goal here, the long-term goal, is not just sort of documentation of this material, but it's preservation. We want to be able to protect this, conserve it, protect the burials, but also provide diverse publics with information about what transpired here. Not just so that the Boy Scouts and people that visit Custaloga Town can benefit from it, so that everybody in the local community can benefit from it and learn the importance of Custaloga Town in the development of Western Pennsylvania and regional history. So we took a broader approach and have sort of been looking at other features. So there are some reports of Native American rock art in the region that we've begun to look into. We're doing some more surveying that I'll show you some photographs of that sort of illustrate the approach we've been taking. And the hope is that if we build up enough evidence, then we can go to the government, we can say, we think that this area, not just this one site, not just the burial monument, but this entire area is sufficiently important to qualify for a district, an archaeological district on the National Register. And if we can do that, then it affords certain protections and tax breaks for the property owners that make it beneficial to continue to preserve that land, which is something that I think we all want to see. And I should also mention it's going to dovetail very nicely with a lot of other efforts and concerns being raised by the French Creek Valley Conservancy. We've been conversing with Kevin Boozle and the owners of the Boy Scout land, and in the interest of not only recognizing that this is not just a cultural and historical landscape, but it's a natural history, a biological landscape. And so there's a convergence of unique aspects of history, but also, again, the rich biodiversity of the French Creek watershed. All of that is interconnected and intertwined, and we need one to understand and appreciate the other. Previous work was actually undertaken in the first week of April in 1938 by an archaeologist by the name of Chauve, who was then working for the Works Progress Administration. One among many projects that were undertaken at this time to provide, obviously, people with jobs during economic hard times. And they went out and after a couple of years of sending out mass surveys, in essence, they were trying to locate sites that they could have people go dig to develop and generate collections. Custer Town was one of these sites, so Chauve went out with a crew and sought to more or less see if he couldn't find Guyasuta's burial. It's a sort of ground truth. And so what we have here are a couple of photographs that we were able to obtain copies of very, very recently from the great folks at the State Museum of Pennsylvania in Harrisburg, and show some of what Chauve and his crew were engaged in. Now, unfortunately, they did archaeology a little bit differently back then. They weren't quite doing things to the standards that we hold today in terms of documentation recordation, but no doubt we're thrilled to have these photographs. So what you see here is actually the photograph, which I believe is at the beginning of the excavation, showing them sort of starting to strip that topsoil, okay, the organic, rich, darker topsoil from that area all around the grave monument. Okay, so this is 1938, the monument had already been set up where they thought Guyasuta had been buried, and here they are stripping off all the sediment. Now, their plan here, if you weren't already sort of clued in, is that anytime you dig a hole, you're taking dirt out, you put the dirt back in. It's not going in the same way as it was when you took it out. It gets all mixed, churned together, different layers of sediment and soil. It changes the color, changes the texture, sometimes even the smell, and if you're one of those archaeologists, even the taste. But they can mix that dirt in, put it back in, it leaves a stain in the ground. So they're stripping off the dirt here. It tells us what they're doing is they're looking for those stains from where they dug the burial shafts. And that's how they're going to locate the burials. You can see they're starting with a couple of trenches, and we know from the very brief report that Chauve prepared, they did just that. And in fact, here's a photograph, undated, showing what was undertaken a little bit later, but a nice, rather deep, at least over a meter and a half deep trench, which would be sort of immediately north coming off the monument, because of the face of the monument, which is on the left there. If you're standing in front of Guyasuta's burial monument, you're pretty much facing west. So in this case, you can see one of those deep trenches, and there's nothing in here. There are a few photographs surviving of the burials, but I agree with Jay and a lot of other Native communities that, unless there's really a good reason, we don't need to show the pictures of human remains. It's not generally appropriate. But Jay thought that it would be perfectly okay to share with you some of the photographs of the artifacts themselves. Now, there were 3 burials uncovered, which, as you might recall, coincides quite well with the 3 burials described by John Martin and a few others in their transcribed oral accounts in the mid-late 19th century. So what you see here are a number of artifacts that were recovered from one of the burial that is widely believed to be Guyasuta's burial. And by and large, the contents that you see I've listed here: a brass kettle, an iron comb, some trade beads, cloth fragments, a jackknife, a Barlow-style jackknife, a lump of sulfur, a fire steel for striking and making fires, and coffin nails, more or less jive well with the contents that Martin described going into the grave, save for the omission of a couple other objects, namely a tomahawk, and there are a couple of items that Martin mentions. Well, again, we don't have a great deal of detail, but Chauve does note that when they were excavating the burial believed to be Guyasuta's burial, that it looked like the upper portion, the upper half, had been disturbed. And in fact, there were things that they found, it looks like pins, silver pins that came off the backs of brooches, as if someone had yanked them off of the clothing after looting the grave shortly thereafter. And then, again, if people who were looting the graves had gone to start at the top, they would know, based on burial patterns in the time, tin cups, trade beads, brass kettles were fairly common grave accompaniments. They would know sort of what to expect and find and where to go to look to find what they wanted. So the absence of some of these grave goods, that small discrepancy, can be attributed to this disturbance of the burial, if they adequately recognize that disturbance. But by and large, the contents all well match to a high degree of detail what Martin talks about. Same obtained to the other burials. Excuse me, one burial of an adult woman located nearby contained a tin cup, cloth fragments, and beads. And those are, in fact, wampum shell beads and surviving bits of cloth. I regret to say that at the conclusion of Schoeff's excavations, it's a little bit murky in the historical record, but it sounds as if maybe not all those artifacts made it back, or maybe they were reburied. There was apparently some friction between the Hadricks, the then current landowners. It's unclear whether Schoeff really had full permission to be doing what he was doing on the property. And it's perhaps worth pointing out that Schoeff later in life also owned an antique shop where he sold and traded in antiquities. Suffice to say that all those artifacts we just saw, none of them are at the State Museum in Harrisburg, where they would have gone had they been saved. So hopefully they were reinterred with the deceased. Now, what you see here is what I think is sort of the final closing photograph. You might not have caught in the earlier photographs, but there was no real clear illustration in those photographs looking south and west of these tombstones. And there are some historic accounts, newspaper clippings that talk about how some of those earlier gravestones for Guyasuta and the woman and young boy had been for a while used to sort of edge a hearth or fire pit on the property. And so what I suspect we see here is sort of the end. You see some mounds of dirt on top of the graves. They had clearly dug a couple of trenches, locating those burials, and they reestablished the headstones. The surviving artifacts of the State Museum in Harrisburg include a lot of 19th century ceramics, bits of metal, things like that that would correspond with the occupation of the Hadrick farm, not surprisingly, that house being built in 1820 and 1821. There are a handful of other sort of period-appropriate artifacts, a couple of glass trade beads, which appear to be sort of consistent with what we'd expect for the 18th century. But again, there's not a lot that made it to the State Museum, much to our disappointment. So, since 2016, we've been back at the site conducting limited test excavations, doing some remote sensing work, in large part to sort of assess and evaluate what remains in terms of the archaeological materials, but also see if we can't figure out where Schoeff worked. Okay, he makes remarks about how they dug all over the knoll where the burials are, but didn't really find anything. And we want to know, well, where all did he dig? How did he dig? He didn't unfortunately provide us with those details. So we return to the property that you see here. Now, what we've done is, again, anybody who lives around here, lives near French Creek, is going to know all too well that flooding can be a frequent occurrence and quite dramatically alter the landscape. And we've seen this, as you'll see, this last March we came down and visited, there was severe flooding that raised the water level. And anytime that happens, you have a great potential for large amounts of sediment and dirt to be moved from one place to another, to be excavated, or also be redeposited. So land surface levels can change dramatically, particularly the closer you get to French Creek and Deer Creek. So the map that you see here is a map showing you terrain. It's an aerial overview based on LiDAR data, sort of the lasers that they shoot from planes. And what Frank Bento, our geomorphologist and geoarchaeologist, has indicated here are three sort of major landforms. I don't really want to get too much into the geology side of things, but what I want to underscore is that our attentiveness and attention to these different landforms has been important for helping us decide where to dig and helping us understand why, if we're not finding things, why we're not finding them. So if we don't find much of anything or things that look like they're heavily disturbed down there near the creek bottom, well, that shouldn't be surprising. These have been heavily reworked through flooding, okay, over the years. So it also helps us delimit the ages of some of these features. In fact, based on the rates of accumulation, the content of different types of artifacts, knowing a little bit about sort of climate change the last few thousand years, we can be fairly certain that sort of at the base level, a lot of the sort of geological deposits that all of these sediments are lying upon really are young, okay, in the last 10,000 years. And in fact, a lot of the material that we're most interested in here, okay, and this is these are the contemporary roads. So the Hadrick farm is off over here, just off the map, and the monument is right up over here. We're looking at areas that we shouldn't be expecting to find things that are much, much older than a few thousand years ago. So this sort of helps set the stage for the field work. Last year and this year, we've been doing some remote sensing. We've done some ground penetrating radar, conductivity, and gradiometry. Remote sensing is generally defined as obtaining data from a distance. But it also allows us to assess archaeological deposits and materials that might be below the surface, subsurface, without doing any digging, doing any destruction. And so increasingly, it used to be that this is what archaeologists did sort of to help locate sites, to identify sites, and now it's a really important critical tool of archaeology. Archaeology is destructive. We go in and we dig, we're destroying archaeological sites. We're messing up the dirt. Okay, it's information that we're going to lose if we don't report it and document it. So this helps us sort of streamline our approach. Now, this is an early map showing you the location of some of the anomalies. And I think, given the size of the screen, probably some of the easiest anomalies for you all are going to be this feature here, and then some sort of brighter and lighter spots there. And this is the Guyasuta burial monument right there in the cemetery area. So obviously our interest here was seeing if we could locate some of the perhaps contemporaneous burials that would go along with Guyasuta and the other two individuals. There are some anomalies. They're not particularly patterned. The one feature that's bright and red on the lower left is a road that shows up in the 19th century Hadrian map. The road is no longer there today, but shows up as a very obvious subsurface feature. Beyond that, there's not a real clear picture. So even in the vicinity of the monument, we don't see a great deal. So the remote sensing has been useful for helping sort of correlate historic maps and what we've been doing now. But aside from some potential anomalies, those are things that we would have to then go excavate to actually explore and find out what they are to be sure. Some of those anomalies could be burials, they could be rocks that could have been grave markers, or they could just be sort of random glacially deposited rocks that have washed down the hill. Suffice it to say, what we learned from looking at those earlier photographs of Schoeff's burials that he excavated is that they were working at a meter or more depth, which got into some really old glacial sediments that are really rocky and sandy and difficult to get through. And also once you get about beyond 1.5 meters, that's about the lower limit for getting really good ground penetrating radar and conductivity data. And so it may be that the fact that we didn't find some real clear anomalies could be because some of these burials might have been deeper than some of the instrumentation we were using would have been effective. This shows a photograph of some of the students excavating on one of the lower terraces, just sort of showing the process by which we excavate and remove sediment. This has been a site and an opportunity for field training for our students, Mercyhurst archaeology anthropology students who want to learn how to excavate. To illustrate sort of the dynamic landscape that we've been dealing with, these are a couple photographs that Ann and I took in March, areas which were underwater in March but which were completely dry. So here's Dr. Vento with students in 2016 on the bank of North Fork of Deer Creek. This is that same upper bank in March of this year. So pretty dramatic, high incidence of flood. And what that means again is we're dealing with a dynamic landscape that's going to rework and move around lots of artifacts and sediments. We saw a photograph of some of the open excavations. We've also been doing a limited amount of pedestrian survey, so walking systematically over the landscape, flagging artifacts or features that we see on the surface. Sediment accumulates as plants and animals decay. Give enough time, you get thick layers of sediment. What happens here in this particular area is that on the higher elevation areas, there isn't a great deal of soil formation or accumulation. And so the package of sediments that might contain artifacts isn't terribly thick. But it also means with all the vegetation and overgrowth, it's really hard to see things that are just sitting on the surface unless they're really big and obvious, like a big rock that looks like a gravestone or a grave mark or something like that. But we had some success, particularly in areas where Jeff Daly had recently brush hogged, clearing the land, so we had them do some pedestrian survey. And we did locate a couple of surface artifacts, mainly stone tools and the like. Then here you see students preparing for a surface survey on the left, some excavation of our standard systematic 1 by 1 meter excavation units. And then on the lower left, what you see are some students engaged in excavation of shovel test pits. So these are the probes, 60 centimeter diameter probes that we put at regular intervals. In this case, we're often working at about 10 meter intervals to sort of systematically probe the subsurface deposit of the site, looking for artifacts and the like. A couple photographs showing some of these finished excavations On the upper left, we have an exposed area that appears to be what we might think, we're not sure the age, we haven't found anything that's really diagnostic or datable, but it's probably, or perhaps late Archaic, so going back 2,000, 3,000 years ago, showing a large thermal feature, lots of discolored sand and sediments and rocks, and it's, I don't know how we all can make it out, but you should be able to see some of the soil discoloration here along the eastern and western margins of this 2 by 2 meter excavation unit. This is another excavation unit that was opened up near the house. You can see, comparatively, here's the oddly undisturbed subsoil. You can see how shallow both of these units are. So there's not a lot of dirt. It's not like we're having to dig 3 meters down into the dirt. And then I also point out there's a nice sort of historic era pickaxe head in the corner of the excavation unit. So what have we been finding? Well, a fair bit of things, and increasingly some more interesting artifacts as of this past summer. And so I'll show you a couple of photographs of these artifacts and sort of try and contextualize it within our understanding of the site and what we want to do out here. But again, reminding you that this is very preliminary. So the stuff that you see that we found this year is literally, I took photographs a couple days ago with my cell phone so I could show you guys what we found, because we literally, not but a couple weeks ago, got in back from the field and are still playing catch up. A projectile point, this was found in the layers of dirt over top of that archaic, perhaps archaic period thermal feature. It's a somewhat enigmatic style. Allison Burns, who was our lithic specialist, looked at this object and she said it could be a style that dates to the late archaic or early woodland period. So we're dealing with something that's a couple thousand years ago, 2,000, 3,000 years ago. A little bit earlier than what we're looking for at Custaloga Town. We do get some historic ceramics you see on the upper right, a lot of 19th century ceramics, but we are getting some hints increasingly, particularly this last summer, of 18th century ceramics that would be diagnostic and help us pin down where people are working. And one of the cool artifacts is an Onondaga church gunflint. This was actually found in the middle of the road that led to a private landowner property on the edge of French Creek. And this is interesting because it's Onondaga Church, which is a local church, and would perhaps imply that it's aboriginally made, as it's not consistent with the materials or style that we see for French or British gunflints. So it could be, obviously, someone French or British who made their own out of local materials, or it could be a Delaware or Seneca individual that made that. There are other bits of napstone, chipped stones, flakes that we call them, demonetize that debris for making stone tools. A lot of that, according to our lithic specialist, over 3/4 has been thermally altered. So that suggests that either people are doing it intentionally because it can improve the workability, the usefulness of the stone for making raw material, or there was a big fire that passed through the area. And you saw that big thermal feature, so we're sort of unsure how to exactly explain that, but she noted that it was an unusually high amount of burned material. Here what you see are some of the first glimpses of some of the artifacts recovered from our 2017 field season that just wrapped not long ago. We continue to get small amounts of stone artifacts, which are very difficult to date. They could be a couple hundred or a couple thousand of years old. Another projectile point that was found actually during our pedestrian survey, which made it all sort of worthwhile. That appears to be a style that excuse me, dates to the late Archaic period, so again, sort of consists of about 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. Another surprise is this large piece of Aboriginal ceramic. You can't see a cross-section here, but it's rather thick. And sort of consists with some of the earlier styles of ceramics. It has cordage impressions, and this actually came from the dirt in the profile on the bank of Deer Creek. Okay, showing where it had been deposited at an earlier time or washed down on the slope. In this particular case, again, we're looking at something that's probably earlier middle woodland. So again, minimally a good few hundred years again earlier still than what we're looking for at Custaloga Town. But, and conveniently after I stepped out of town, my colleagues find increasing numbers of 18th century ceramics. And so what you see on the right there are some, let's see, there's a ceramic white kaolin clay pipe stem. This sort of people would break off routinely. Archaeologists back in the 50s found out that if you measure the bore diameter of those pipe stems, the bore diameters actually decrease in size over time until about 1800s, early 1800s when they sort of all become highly standardized. So I measured the bore diameter of this on Friday in the lab, and it came out at about 2.3 millimeters, which I then converted to 64. Suffice it to say, based on large samples from other sites in the east, we would suggest a date based on that pipestone of 1680 to 1720. Now that's a little bit earlier than sort of the target period we're looking at, but again, you know, this is the way dating works in archaeology. We're never happy with one date. So that's one date. There's a fair bit of fudge room in play. If I mismeasured it and found it was a little bit, slightly bit smaller, it would bump it up to perhaps as late as 1750. So I'm fairly comfortable that we're on the right track. Same thing with some of these other ceramics. Dr. Howak identified this as a piece of pearlware, a type of ceramic that is sort of fades out of popularity by the early 19th century. And there's a couple of pieces of redware that are quite small. So we feel like we're getting sort of closer to what we're looking for in terms of finding any remains of the village. The area has been heavily worked over by people, by floods. The mill race, as you could tell from that historic map, cut through where the village likely was. So it's likely that we're dealing with a lot of natural disturbance and a lot of also anthropogenic, human-induced disturbance of the landscape. Now there are some other areas that we're going to look forward to testing in the future, and we hope to be able to further refine not only what remains of the village site, but how much there is in terms of intact cultural deposits. Again, sort of coincident with this increase of recovery of artifacts that date from period of interest. Ann and Dr. Howak found a stratigraphic layer, so a layer of dirt that's rich in organics from which a lot of these artifacts appear to be coming from. And what we might think is that that may be a sliver of sediment deposited across the site area that dates to the late 18th century. And that would be a good find that we could then track across the site and look for other sort of archaeological features. But you know, hopefully we can come back and do this again next year, fill you in on what we found, and maybe the plot will thicken a little bit more. But I'm happy to try and answer any questions I might have, but I also want to take a minute to thank all the people who've really made this research possible. Obviously, the Seneca Nation of Indians for working with us and collaborating on this project and asking us to do it. It's an honor and a privilege. Mr. William Filson of the Mercer County Historical Society, Dwayne Howard, Jeff Daly, Tetra Williger, and everybody else at the Custaloga Town Scout Reservation. Mr. Bill Parrish from Zanesville, Ohio, who's very kindly let us work on the property. Seneca Nation Geographic Information Services for their help making maps and generating maps. David George Shango of the Seneca Iroquois National Museum, who has very kindly agreed to, when we are all said and done, receive the artifacts and documentation and curate them and make them available for students and researchers far into the future. Allison Burns and Alan Quinn of Mercyhurst to facilitate the field work. Dr. Ben Scarf, one of our historians, who's provided a lot of additional insight, as has Jim Brown, who's provided some useful documents to pursue. Kevin Moose of the French Creek Valley Conservancy, who's working with us to help make our interest in conservation and preservation jive with those of the natural history. And then some folks at the State Museum and the State Historic Preservation Office, Kira Heinrich, Janet Johnson, and then a good friend of mine and collaborator, Rex Weeks, who is knowledgeable of regional rock art. And thank you guys for coming and demonstrating your interest in local history. Sir.
How many years do you think there's work to be done there?
That's one of those questions that any of these sites where you start to really dig into the archaeological historical record, you come up with stuff to do for perpetuity. I would say that minimally in terms of meeting the goals and charge given to us by the Seneca Nation, we've got at least one more year of testing and excavation. But there's always a caveat that depending on what you find, it may alter the picture. We're going to find something pretty spectacular, amazing. See, having really good, strong archaeological evidence that this is where the village is and that this is in fact where Guyasuta was buried, all makes it a stronger argument that this is historically significant, should be protected and preserved. So I think we're flexible insofar as we want to be able to make the best argument to the state to put this on the National Register to protect it. And if we can do that, it protects that cultural heritage, and it also again adds to the likelihood that we can help facilitate its protection as a rich area for local biodiversity.
Thank you.
You said at the beginning that someone witnessed the burial?
Yeah. John Martin, who was an early landowner who, if I'm recalling, moved there from Maryland in the late 1790s. And he had a property that was more or less adjacent to the Hadrian farm, just sort of a little bit to the south, and had lived in the area for a long time, and was there, and he said, "Who is this?" And they said, "Oh, it's Guyasuta," and described in this sort of affidavit the contents of the burial. And that was transcribed, published at least in this 1879 Venango County history. And
What year did he witness the burial?
he does not specify, and so there, aside from the controversy over the location of the burial itself, there's some confusing accounts of when he actually died. Some people say 1796, but I'm thinking that 1796 might have been the date mentioned in history when John Martin and his family moved there. It's possible that may be sort of the earliest date. But the marker, the grave marker itself says circa 1810. So somewhere between 1796 and 1810, I think is the best that we can say. There's a lot of conflicts in these historical accounts. It's a little bit like that game of telephone a lot of us played as kids, where someone says something and it becomes hearsay and gets written down. We're fortunate here that we've got Hadrian's very good map. I mean, he was a well-known surveyor and produced a lot of maps, and obviously had kids who did well in the oil business a few years later, who documented this. And again, the Hadrian family, they donated a lot of their papers to the Mercyhurst County Historical Society. So there is, I should say, a fair bit of documentary research that we still need to follow up on. We've done some, but we haven't tapped everything that's out there available. Yes, ma'am.
What are the other areas that are claiming he's buried there?
The Darlington branch, which is actually has another Boy Scout affiliation, that is a camp called Guyasuta. That was prominent General O'Hara, his property, and is mentioned, sort of in folklore as being buried on an Indian burial mound in the property. But there's no, to my knowledge, and what they found, there's no actual indications that they actually really ever knew each other. It's not like there's somebody said, "Oh, we went to visit General O'Hara, and Guyasuta was there." He could have passed through. It's one of those things where I think people sort of build up the prominence of their land and by claiming these types.
Where is that?
It's outside of Pittsburgh.
East of Pittsburgh.
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Where did he die?
Again, we're not real sure. There's some accounts that suggest, and again, it's unclear when people cite something where it comes from. What we do is I say, okay, if someone says John Martin, then I find out where's the earliest account that John Martin published this, or it was published for. There are some accounts that suggest he died on the Corn Planter Grant, which sort of traditional family territories. But he also, if we think remember that these were humans just like us, that this was Custaloga Town was a place where he spent a long period of time during a really particularly critical and formative period of his life. And people now appreciate that he probably played a much greater role in Pontiac's rebellion or Pontiac's war than people had appreciated. And he was probably a lot more influential on corn planters' growth and development and Handsome Lakes than people appreciate. So it's not too far of a stretch to see that this would have been a place that he would have come back as familiar territory. It would have been relatively quiet, and particularly at that period of time. And we know that people were using that for thousands of years before Custaloga Town was there, and hundreds of years after. I mean, if they're saying in the 1820s that people were still living in wigwams, so there were wigwams still visible 18 to 20, that's a pretty sizable component, 100, 200 people perhaps. So and for all we know, he could have family there still, connections. Again.
You're talking about Custaloga?
Guyasuta. The Custaloga Town, there's actually a couple Custaloga towns, which one moved closer to Newcastle around 1764, which is not uncommon for these villages once they sort of exhaust some of the local resources, will pick up and move. And it also would have put them a little bit closer to the political action as it shifted by 1764.
And why don't they believe that he died up at Corn Planters?
We don't know. There's accounts that say he died up there. It could have been a request that he was brought back and buried at Custaloga Town, or maybe he, in his advanced age, retired and was living in Custaloga Town. There isn't a lot of mention of him after the early 1790s in the historical documents, but we know he was alive into the early 1790s, And then sort of the next account is Martin's account of his burial. Lots of gaps.
We really don't know where he's buried, but we're looking at that Custaloga town based on documentation.
Yeah, really
Someone who maybe
His name was on that too.
heard it.
the linchpin is really, in my estimation, is Martin's argument. There's far more weight in evidence. There's a longer and more substantive transcribed oral history recording him being buried there. Could it be wrong? Sure, but I would say that given the eyewitness accounts that it was someone called Guyasuta that was buried there, the period of time fits, and that Martin describes the contents of the burial with a high degree of accuracy with what Show found. Can we say for sure? No. Like so many things in archaeology. But what we can say is that this really looks right to me. And again, I haven't had a horse in the race.
Who were the woman and the young boy that were buried there?
That's a good question I haven't really probed into too much. There are a couple accounts that I've run across, sort of 19th century accounts that mention that they refer to as Chet Squaw, and squaw for a lot of native peoples is a really disparaging word. It's an unpleasant word, so I dislike calling her that term. But this woman who's affiliated with this individual, Chet, I've run across a couple references, contemporary records, that talk about a Seneca Delaware leader who has a name that begins with Chet. I don't know if there's some relationship there, because the account that I recall was one in which Guyasuta was mentioned with this other leader. So I think there's some affiliation there. But as to understanding why they're buried there, I don't really understand. And there's a faint date that you can make out on the woman's grave marker that says 1790 something. I don't remember what we said. So why there's discrepancy in dates, I don't know. And I don't know when they put those grave markers there. They look old. They look in a style that could be contemporaneous. But again, the limitations of this historical record is that we don't get good, clear indications of, well, were they buried at the same time, or was Martin describing it simply as he witnessed him being buried and knew that these other people were buried there afterwards? Any questions? Sir?
I've encountered, but it's a long time ago, a reference to old Chet, his wife and idiot son, as being buried at that site. I can't pull up the source of the reference.
Yeah.
Memory, have you encountered anything similar to that?
Yes, and it's one of those things that I've admittedly been so focused on Guyasuta that I hadn't probed too much into the other individuals, but it's something that's worth looking into. But I do recall, I know what you're speaking of.
Old Chet does occur in John Reynolds' account of his settlement out at Cherry Tree.
Okay.
In the early days, and as one of the Indians that was hunting in the vicinity and supplied him with meat.
Great.
And,
Okay, I'll double check.
so old Chet pops up here and there.
Yeah, it's in there. I did notice.
Historical figure.
Cool. Thank you. Well, thank you guys.
Just quickly, so the assumption is that the earlier archaeological dig removed everything, and you're just trying to figure out where those pits had been.
Yeah, I mean, for us to sort of key it into our maps, and sort of as we make our maps of where
Yeah.
we find things, to sort of understand what the relationship in space and time is between those earlier excavations. Yeah, the problem is that the remote sensing didn't, it tells us there might be something here, but because it's sort of creating an image of anomalies that vary in contrast, we'd really have to do some ground, we'd have to dig things up. And the tribe and the historical society has not been object to that, but we sort of have to balance it with the time and effort. Like, what are we going to gain? If we obtain the layouts of the stained sediments, we already know from photographs that Sheriff took that they hit burials right there near the monument. Lots of other historical accounts talk about other burials being there. Some of those anomalies may or may not be those burials. So I think what it's done is help us sort of delimit the spatial area that the burials are more likely going to be in. And particularly as we move further north of that cemetery and start finding more of these 18th century appropriate artifacts, it suggests that we're moving out of that cemetery area. So it's all good, and again, it sort of reaffirms what's on that Pedrick map from 1879 or so. So it's good. We also get, these historical records can be equally biased or filled with errors. So archaeology in that way is a nice, important, independent check of a lot of those documents and records. Thank you all very much. It was fun.